This is Tar Heel Talk, an in-depth look at the issues and people making news in North Carolina. Here's your host, Sonia Williams.
Today's show focuses on North Carolina women in film who are making an impact not just in our state, but around the country. And joining me now are two of the best in the business, Olympia Stone, documentary filmmaker, and Simone Keith, videographer and editor. Thank you both so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we talk about women in film and March being Women's History Month, but you all have been working in the industry for a number of years. Talk a little bit about how you started and what led you to make films.
You want to go first? Sure, sure. I teach at the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke University, and it's such a dynamic kind of place because you meet all kinds of people, and Olympia took one of my classes, and that's how we met. And you know, it's easy to become friends with people who are already working with different projects, and so we became friends, and all of a sudden we are collaborating together in different projects, and that's how we all started.
Mm-hmm. But you've been working for a long time.
Yes, I've been, my background is in broadcast, meaning, you know, being a camera person and a video editor, and had done, you know, collaborated on other documentaries as well. But with Olympia, that's how we met, and that's how it all started. And it has been a lot of fun.
And I have to say, as a matter of full disclosure, Simone, you and I are former colleagues.
That's
you are
right.
a 3-time Emmy Award-winning videographer and editor, and I've had the pleasure of working with you for about 12 years, and so you're incredible at what you do.
Oh, yeah. It's good of you to say that. It was my pleasure to work with you too.
Mm-hmm. And so, Olympia, what drew you to making films?
I started working in films right after college, actually in television, working for 1-hour documentaries for different cable channels in different capacities. But I started out at the very lowliest and, you know, sort of toiled my way through the ranks. And I did that for a long time. And then when I moved to North Carolina, I had started making my first independent film, and I hadn't learned how to edit. And I took a class at the Center for Documentary Studies, and I met Simone. And she was my teacher, and she was such a great teacher, I have to say. And she was so good at, you know, teaching how to edit that that gave me sort of insight into how to finish this film that I'd been working on. So Simone and I worked on that first film, which was about my father. It was called The Collector. Simone, I think you helped me color correct and sort of polish,
we did
edit,
some editing,
tweaking,
yes.
Many late night phone calls, tears over media crashes, and you know, things like me usually panicking and Simone talking me off the ledge. But it was a really great experience, and for me, learning how to edit was very important in what I sort of went on to do creatively. So.
Absolutely. And I know that a piece that you worked on together is about Elizabeth King. We have an excerpt of that. Let's take a look at it, and then you can tell us more about it.
That's another thing about my work, you know, that my growing up years, from the age of 3 on, were years surrounded by her paralysis, all the mechanical devices in our house, you know, for her. There was a very specific moment that I remember, and I was not young, you know, I was 35 years old. It was a time when I was making figures that were more like marionette puppets, that were strung figures, rather than self-supporting figures. And I remember saying to a friend, looking at my work, I was saying, I'd really like to make these things stand up by themselves. And then it hit me. It really hit me like a truck, you know, and it hit me back into time that part of what I was doing, not all of what I was doing, but part of what I was doing was a kind of curious act of restitution, of correction, of repair.
Again, that is Acts of Repair. Tell us a little bit more about Elizabeth King and that particular piece.
Elizabeth is a very interesting artist. Her work is quite unusual, and you don't forget it after you've seen it, I think. I actually met her with Simone because we did an interview with her for a different film. And when we did that interview, I remember going to her studio and meeting her and talking to her, realizing how incredibly intelligent she was, and seeing this space, this incredible creative space that she worked in, and just being very so intrigued by her as a person, as an artist, as a thinker. I mean, she's incredibly intellectual, and she's a very smart woman. So for all of these reasons, I was interested in making this film. And as we started filming with her, she was a tough nut to crack. And this was kind of the story. This is about her mother's polio, and this connection between the work that she does and her mother's polio, and being this caregiver of her mother, I thought was an interesting insight into her work and could help a viewer kind of understand what she was doing. Because I think her work often is not very accessible. It's hard to understand. So that's what this clip is about.
And Simone, as a videographer, you had to really bring that to life through film.
Yes, that was really, really interesting. Some of her pieces were quite unique, and there is also a matter of scale. Some of her pieces are delicate and they're small, and so it took a special way of, recording those pieces. But one thing about her that I have to say is that she was incredibly open to have us there. So I think when that happens, it kind of fosters more creativity. You don't feel so intimidated. So she didn't ever make us feel intimidated, but kind of welcome us to be in her studio and follow her. And so it was quite fascinating. And I have never done documentaries about art. So when I started collaborating with Olympia, this has been really, really interesting, because I've learned a lot through the work that Olympia does, and open doors and expose me to a part of documentary filmmaking that I was not familiar with. So it has been really, really cool.
And I know that there are a lot of women who are entering documentary filmmaking now, but Olympia, you've had experience with women over decades who have been a part of filmmaking industry.
Yeah, and I mean, when I was thinking about it, it's actually all from the time that I started working in television and continued on in this field. It's actually mostly been women that I've worked with. Women have been my bosses. Maybe the big bosses were men ultimately, but I was thinking about it, and I was thinking it's because filmmaking, I think, is so collaborative, which is that plays to women's strengths, and I like to collaborate with people, and I think that's one of the reasons Simone and I work so well together, because Simone's so wonderful to work with, and she's open, and I feel like I can ask her all of my stupid questions, and she puts up with me. So it's anyway. I have to say though that I do really. I've had wonderful experiences working with women and for women in film for the most part, with very few exceptions.
And you've had great success. You've won many awards, had your film screened on a national stage, and so you've done some incredible work.
Thank you.
Far. We're going to take a break, and we're going to talk more in just a minute. We'll be back with more Tar Heel Talk after these messages. We're talking today about North Carolina women in film who are making an impact not just in our state, but around the country. And with us again is Olympia Stone, documentary filmmaker, and Simone Keith, who is a videographer and editor. Thank you both again for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, you have collaborated on a number of pieces that are being screened around the country. Talk a little bit about one of your pieces that you've worked on, highlighting an artist.
So Simone and I worked on a film called The Original Richard McMahon, which was the first short film that I've ever made, although it wasn't that short, it was 20 minutes long in the end. And this was a film where I knew Simone, her skills were going to be a perfect fit for this kind of unknown experience that we were taking on, which was going kind of blind into a subject that I thought was going to be interesting. But when we went to Florida, which is where he was based, I really did not know what to expect. I had only communicated with him by phone. He's a poor person who's not on doesn't have any kind of a phone, or he would email me from the library, but he didn't have a computer or any means of, doesn't have a car. So he was hard to get in contact with.
Right.
And for those reasons, there were many questions about filming. And I also knew that because Simone works with, very small, just a small camera, and we could kind of be very flexible and nimble with the equipment, that it was going to be a good fit for this subject. So we took the leap, and it ended up being a really, really interesting experience.
Yes, yes. I think, to me, I feel that it's a huge responsibility when people open up their lives to you, right? They're letting you in, and the way that you portray them, I mean, the responsibility is huge. You can really, I think we are allowed to take our view and our point of view on that, but also what I love about Olympia is that if you want to be a subject, you want to be a subject in her hands, because the way that she treats the subjects are always so respectful and so human, and understanding where the people are at and how to portray them without any prejudice. I think it's wonderful. It's wonderful to be a part of that experience. So it was a very interesting film. It was a very interesting subject, and I was glad that we were just the two of us, because really the subject matter, I think if we had a larger crew, it wouldn't have worked as well, because it was more of an intimate portrait of this artist.
And the way that you portray him is incredible. And we have an excerpt of that, so let's take a look at that.
I'm turned on to all kinds of art, whatever is feasible to do. I'm looking for some artifacts, Native American, early prehistoric, to add to that collection. Yeah. This is a Maori canoe from New Zealand. I went through 8 layers of Manila folders to create the thickness. This took probably about 2 months to do. I'm Richard McMahon. I am the curator as well as the creator of the mini museum. The museum consists of over 1,100 objects and growing. Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night. The Vincent van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam has one, and they don't own it. The Museum of Modern Art owns it. So the curator of the museum had asked a friend of mine about how can he acquire one of these. I've had about 30 to 40 requests for this one. Everything you see in that display case I made over a period of 27 years. So I have the mini museum and the tomb of Karaneb. One thing that drives me to do this is inspiration, to help inspire people that art is not impossible. People can do this. People that never held a brush or anything, they can do it. Just that some people are so intimidated by art and how to create it. Everybody can draw. They have talent and they just have not discovered it.
What a beautiful way to portray a man that you said has had such a humble person.
Yeah, I sort of misspoke. He's, what drew me to that subject is that I initially was told that he was a savant, like Rain Man, but with art. Mm-hmm. It turned out he had never been officially diagnosed as having that, but I do think that he has something going on, undiagnosed something, right. Mm-hmm. But he's managed to create something beautiful out of literally garbage that he, collects, cardboard boxes, pizza boxes. He makes these sculptures and things out of them that are amazing for this mini museum, which, maybe one day we'll be able to visit in Florida.
Absolutely, truly an inspiration. We're going to take another break. We'll talk more in just a minute. Don't go away. Tar Heel Talk will continue after these messages. Welcome back to Tar Heel Talk. I'm Sonia Williams. Today's show focuses on North Carolina women in film who are making an impact not just in our state, but around the country. And joining me now are two of the best in the business, Olympia Stone, documentary filmmaker, and Simone Keith, who is a videographer and editor. And you've been sharing so much of your work and your passion about your work with us today. I know that there is a piece you like to focus, Olympia, on artists. And there's another piece that you have to share with us that focuses on an artist who does things in a unique way.
In 2000, I think this film came out in 2015. It's about an artist named David Beck, who I have actually known almost my entire life. My father had an art gallery in New York, and this was one of his artists. So I grew up sort of surrounded by his work, and he's always been somebody that I've been just admired and loved his work my whole life. So I've always wanted to make a film about him. And he makes these, it's sort of hard to explain, but he makes these amazing structures, and often they're movie theaters or they're opera theaters, and he creates the whole structure, so he's sort of like a miniature architect, but then he also carves all the figures inside and does these incredibly intricate, sometimes paintings using also very unusual materials like gold leaf and mosaic and all different kinds of things. And he mechanizes the sculptures so that the figures move in the audience members, do things, and they each do a different thing. And so he's just a very unique and different artist. And his work is actually on permanent exhibition at the Smithsonian in Washington. But the frustrating thing is you can't actually go up to the piece and interact with it because it's so fragile. It's cordoned off. So the nice thing I think about this film is you can actually see the work in a way that you can't in a museum because we were able to play things or use the camera to show the way that pieces moved.
Okay, so we have another excerpt of that. It's called Curious Worlds. Let's take a look at that.
You don't really need a knowledge of music to play this. If you have a sense of rhythm or something like that, you can make up things. So if you blow into them, And then you have the ever popular guys in blue suits who kick bells. When I was first starting in the 70s, I worked for a sculptor, and he came out of a group who were making monumental sculptures, you know, be big or go home. I guess it was sort of perverse on my part, but just to do it backwards, do it upside down, and to make small pieces. And also, I always had a problem with where I was living. Like I would be asked to leave all the time, so I had to find a new place. It was a lot easier to make really tiny things and put them in a suitcase. For sculpture and the things that I do, there's a lot of problem solving. What I try to do is I try to consider everything. It's a lot to think about. And so thousands and thousands of decisions, you know. Usually wings, and then the legs. I've been working on this for about 5 months, 6 months, something like that.
If you ever asked David, where do you get these ideas? Have you ever asked him? And has he given you the pat answer? I have a book, Ideas for Skinny Sculptors.
What a fascinating story, and I can imagine, as Simone, as you were saying before, what a huge responsibility it is to capture someone's work.
Yes, and to capture their work well, that's a big difference too, because not only the pieces are fragile, but they are very important to be captured the way that the artist sees them as well, right? So it's incredible.
And so, Olympia, how do you go about finding these artists? Because they're all eclectic, and you've done a really good job of finding people who do really different and interesting things. How do you find them?
Well, I cheated because of my father and my background in growing up in sort of the art business in New York, and not really business, but just being surrounded by artists. I became friends with a lot of artists as a child. And some of those artists, in fact, I've gone on to make films about. So I seem to me, I'm really interested in people that are driven to do things and are sort of completely focused and obsessed. I find that really interesting, and artists are sort of the perfect example of that. And particularly, of course, you have to love the artwork. So that is something I'm fortunate to, also have lots of ideas that I grew up with.
Right. And you've done a lot of work. Like I said, your films have been screened across the country. How can people find out more information about the work that you're doing and see some of your films?
Well, thank you for asking. The best way is probably to go to my website, floatingstone.com. And there I have most of my films. In fact, all my films are streaming on my website. Some are available on Amazon Prime and other, iTunes and places like that. So, but my website is probably the best place to start.
And you and Simone have done some amazing work, so they can certainly go to your website and see that. And I thank you both so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's Tar Heel Talk. To comment on this or other episodes of the show, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, or send us an email at tarheeltalk@fox50.com. I'm Sonia Williams. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again next week.